Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News. No, it's not. Update extra video giving you extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Right, we're going to go to Mick, who's an Australian retired general. He's been out in Ukraine again, I think for his third time. He's just collected a few of his thoughts. I'm going to join him halfway through the thread where he talks about this particular trip. He says the current Ukrainian approach to war has several important themes. The first, Ukraine is fighting the war as a national effort with an array of military, diplomatic, information, technological and societal means. Importantly, it is a democratic effort and there is an interesting civil-military relations studies that could be undertaken. Interesting point there that the way that Ukraine does things is, it appears far more democratic. Although there's still these arguments kicking around. I have them on my threads from pro-Kremlin voices like, oh, this is a dictatorship because Zelensky's not calling an election. And I had to say, no, stop. There's nothing to do, and sorry, this is a sidebar. There's nothing to do with Zelensky making a unilateral decision like a dictator, like Putin might do. Putin has changed the rules so that he can rule until he dies, right? He's changed the rules. That's what he's like. Zelensky is abiding by the constitution of the country that says if you're at war and you're under martial law, which the country is, then you ain't going to have an election. Now, he could try and bend that so that you can have an election, but that would be him acting against the constitution. So him deciding not to have an election is nothing unusual. In the UK, we were supposed to have an election in 1940, so the previous one was in 1935. We didn't have an election from 1935 until 1945. That's 10 years. Okay, so 10 years we didn't have an election. Why? Because the Second World War was there. And that wasn't even in our country. The UK was at war, but it wasn't on the shores of the British Isles, of our sceptred isles. So Zelensky not having an election is unsurprising given there's martial law and his country is at war. There is an invasion of his country and they have only a certain amount of resources, a finite amount of resources and time and effort that they need to be throwing at defending their country. And if you're going to sidetrack everything by spending money and spending time and effort and political capital on running an election, stupid. Like, how hard does this man work, right? He works exceedingly hard. He is going around the world every single day or around his country drumming up support, but he's doing a lot of globetrotting or a lot of receiving important international dignitaries to Kiev, where he is exercising his very strongest political muscles to try and bring about positive effects for his country, right? If you then had to say, oh, you need to take a month out of doing that to go on a campaign trail to run for president, then you'd be like, well, what am I not going to be doing in terms of prosecuting this defensive war effort? So any pro-Kremlin troll in my threads that mentions again that that Zelensky is some kind of anti-democrat dictator because he's not holding an election is so sorely wrong. I just want to shut you down straight away. I'm not having that. It's just no, you get your facts right, and he's adhering to the constitution. But anyway, back to the kind of point is that they take a democratic effort, a democratic approach to doing this war. I mean, they're still a functioning democracy in a much more in many ways a lot more obviously than Putin's Russia, where the Russian Federation has the State Duma, but they appear to be just effectively they're just there for show and a mouthpiece for Putin. Putin pretty much does whatever he wants. The elections are an absolute sham. The elections in Ukraine are not presently a sham. They're working really hard to move away from the corruption that was endemic in Ukraine as a carryover from their days as part of the Soviet Union. So, yeah. Anyway, despite this effort to leverage all national means, it is far from the anything goes approach of Russia. Ukraine is fighting within the laws of war and in accordance with international law. Again, really important distinction there. This is important for legitimacy domestically and in the international community. Of course, when you are absolutely dependent on other nations for your support, and those other nations are themselves affected by public opinion, then you are courting Zelensky and the nation of Ukraine are courting international populations. So in order to get them on side, so that that sympathy and empathy for the Ukrainian people translates into votes in parliament, or votes in elections, which translates to votes in parliament, right? I also think, says Mick Ryan, that this just war approach is something that has come naturally to Ukraine. There appears to be an inherent understanding of their soldiers, generals, and society that doing the wrong thing would not only compromise them strategically, it would be a stain on their souls. Second, Ukraine's way of war is a unique hybrid of Soviet, Western, and Ukrainian cultures, concepts, and technologies. There is a fascinating interplay of older Soviet and newer NATO doctrines for training, leadership, and operations. While much has been achieved in the past decade, the full transition from older Soviet ideas remains an incomplete task. This is something we hear so often, right? It's one of the biggest criticisms of the way that the Ukrainian army operates, is that there's still this hybrid version of the old Soviet way of doing things and the NATO way of doing things. And sometimes that can swing too much one way. So you look at the counter-offensive down in Zaporizhia, and the demands from NATO to do it a certain way were met with a bit of a problem at the beginning with the massacre at Malotokmachka, or the loss of a lot of equipment. And they're like, okay, NATO, you're telling us to do this way, but you're telling us to do something you would never do, because you wouldn't do it without air superiority, and we don't even have air advantage, and you're asking us to do this. So then there has to be some compromise there. But there still is this idea that there's a strong component in the Ukrainian army of old school Soviet doctrine and culture. Anyway, and even the influx of Western equipment, more than 2/3 of their equipment is still legacy Soviet. Third, innovation and adaptation from the ground up. So Mick Ryan's big on adaptation. He's written a book on this in war, adaptation in war. From the ground up is also a key part of this story. The practical problem solving of Ukrainian soldiers and civil companies has provided a critical edge over the past 18 months. Much of this is bottom up, but there are also examples of institutional learning and adaptation where battlefield learning is drawn into training systems. And institutional learning culture, some of it is formal, some of it informal, is part of Ukraine's way of war. Finally, those leading the Ukrainian war effort are also the result of a hybrid experience background. Many have received training in Soviet military institutions as well as NATO institutions, but many military and government leaders have also gained expertise in war from the Russian operations in Crimea and the Donbass since 2014. It is a potent mix, and one that many leaders have used to good effect since the large-scale Russian invasion of 2022. There's much more to this topic there than I could ever hope to cover in a single thread, but I hope this provides some useful insights as I continue developing a model of the Ukrainian way of war. So that's just a little soupçon, a little look into his experiences that he has just had, and the observations he has made in Ukraine. Okay, we're going to go on to a Chris Wiki thread where he's going to talk about drugs in the Russian army. So at least 1 in 10 Russian soldiers in Ukraine is reported to be using drugs, with a network of dealers and couriers supplying narcotics directly to the front lines. And the Russian military is well aware of the problem, but does not seem to be doing much about it. So it appears that here we have drug taking in the Russian army taking place really quite openly there. Video evidence of that. Verstka reports on how Russia's army in Ukraine is hooked on a variety of drugs, including cannabis, bath salts, alpha PVP, also known as flakka in the West, methadone, and amphetamines. Soldiers say they are easy to obtain. It's just like Las Vegas, says one. Quote, they use it out of boredom, says one soldier. War is when you're always waiting for something, occasionally praying for it to go away. When I was smoking salt in the dugout, I didn't give an F about possible betrayal, paranoia. Boredom is much worse. There is this very common trope, this mantra almost, that or idiom that what is it? War is where, nothing happens for most of the time until everything happens at once. There's a lot of doing nothing and then doing everything. So when it's crazy, man, it's crazy. But for the rest of the time, you're sitting in a trench waiting for stuff to happen, and there is a lot of boredom, and that can play on your mind. As he talks about here, paranoia. But when you're taking drugs, you're not getting that. Well, you can argue about different side effects of certain drugs, but paranoia is one. But you can imagine that's it is challenging to keep yourself occupied, especially when you might be out of mobile phone range. You might even have your mobile phone confiscated or not have one or whatever. So, the sorts of things that we do on a daily basis to keep ourselves entertained. Hello, people. Not say this is entertainment. This is education and information and community. But you get the point. Like, we might go and watch a movie, watch the internet, or if you're in a trench, there's only so many times you can clean your gun. So I guess, that's why there is this drug culture. Many soldiers use cannabis with full awareness of their comrades and even of their commanders, who are said to pay little attention to it. A soldier says, I blew grass a couple of times, nothing particularly interesting. I blew it and laid down to watch a movie. Everyone knows if you use drugs in the trenches, of course, the dugout is small. Nobody gives an F, and the main thing is don't bother anyone. Just don't leave the dugouts. For thousands of Russian soldiers in the rear, there is little to do other than consume drugs. So this is back from the front line, where you're doing maybe logistics, but I guess, after you've done what you're supposed to do in a day, what do you do for the rest of the time? Your family's back in a different country. You're in a foreign land where it may be that the locals don't particularly like you. How do you entertain yourself there? Now, for example, we have a rear camp, except for roll calls and routine. In general, nothing happens. There are tasks, of course, that I can't tell you about, but we are not stormtroopers. So you understand, I've only fired shots here twice since March 2022. Others use drugs to try to make our army rations more palatable. Quote, under the influence of salt, it even seemed tasty. Oh, horror. Even army cigarettes were quite good. Though when sober, it was better to pick sunflowers from a minefield and smoke them. It was more useful. Interesting. As for the effect of salt, it makes you want to talk and get stuck. Vodka doesn't take at all. You drink it like water. Professional soldiers are said to be less prone to drug use than the mobilized, who have in many cases brought existing drug addictions with them. Quote, yes, everyone who screwed up in civilian life, they screw up here too. As a contract soldier, well, yeah, imagine you've got mental health issues or whatever, you're particular way in the outside normal world with all your support structures and everything in place and your normal life, and then you're then uprooted and sent to a war zone. It's very high chance that all the issues you've had previously are going to be exacerbated. Quote, the Mobics are effed up. They collect drug packages, cut them down through local dealers, and even use squatter wild hemp found somewhere. Of our 200 species special forces employees, only 3 of us only 3 use, and no one knows about it. Well, almost no one. All the boys here are athletic and healthy. They won't understand. Any BS is not accepted here. So, it depends what type of troop you are. Special forces generally don't. 3 out of 200. So that's what, 1.5%. Whereas 10% is what they're saying for the others, particularly in the mobilized. The soldier says that, quote, there are tons of options here for using drugs. Go to the woods at night in your outfit in the hut. We rented apartments in a couple of places, but didn't live in the right place. Around 10 to 15% of soldiers are said to be drug users, so 10 to 15% there. In airborne forces, other comments that when we entered the Mobic positions, they always had water bottles standing around for drug use. Well, all sorts of holy bottles with foil, but among us professional military men, I've never seen anything like this. And I've never heard or seen anyone using chemical drugs. Drugs are supplied and often made by Ukrainians living in the occupied territories. Couriers will even bring them to the front lines, though they charge higher prices in view of the risk of being attacked. Some Ukrainians have taken to growing poppies and cannabis on their land to supply the occupiers with drugs. As one contract soldier says, when we see such courtyards during clean-up operations, we burn everything there at once. Interesting. So, I wonder if for certain Ukrainians who are doing this and making money out of it, like if I'm going to do anything, like selling drugs and feeding the habits of these soldiers is going to be the most kind of benign thing as someone who's not necessarily pro-Russian can do. Yeah, I'm gonna make money out of these guys by feeding drug addiction. I don't know. Maybe there's a way of rationalizing that. Anyway, quote, the neighbours of the man whose entire garden we burned last time told us before the war he did not have such a field, and when the Russians came, he put it on stream and demand appeared. A steady flow of drugs also enters the occupied territories from Ukraine, some of it couriered by soldiers returning from leave, by visiting relatives, or by those volunteering to bring humanitarian aid to the troops. Professional drug dealers are also active. Since April 2022, says one addict, quote, various classes of dealers from Crimea, Krasnodar and mountainous regions of Russia have entered the Kherson region to supply drugs. They take payment electronically using the mere payment cards issued by the Russian military. In some occupied areas, soldiers themselves took over existing Ukrainian drug networks. A Kherson resident says that, quote, men in uniform, repeatedly from the Airborne Forces VDV, quote, squeezed drugs from a local dealer. They tortured him to hand over the supply channels so that they could trade themselves. He doesn't say what exactly he told them, but they broke his ribs and his arms and legs and took away his jeep and threw him onto the street to die. Drug prices in the occupied territories are very high, at least 2.5 times higher than in Russia itself. According to one addict, prices jumped more than 6-fold after the invasion in February 2022. My goodness, there's an infographic for the cost of drugs in, I presume, the occupied territory. Right, dealers advertise openly online through closed Telegram channels and even through telephone numbers spray painted on the walls of buildings. They make drugs into packages called bookmarks and hide them with the location texted to the buyer for them to collect discreetly. In the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, which have been run for years as criminal enterprises, illegal and pharmaceutical drugs are widely available. Pharmacists often sell powerful prescription drugs such as the barbiturates Lyrica and Tropica under the counter. Soldier recalls, quote, when we were in Luhansk, we crossed paths with Chechens there and they took all the Lyrica out of the pharmacies and they sat in clubs in their uniforms getting effed up. Although drug dealers and soldiers couriering drugs have been arrested, there is only weak enforcement of prohibitions against drugs. As one soldier comments, quote, no one checks the stormtroopers so much. You can't crawl under Bakhmut with a jar and tests. After a colleague was caught injecting his legs, no checks were carried out on the others, a contract soldier from near Kherson says. No one here gives an S, to be honest. However, those who are caught red-handed are sentenced to serve as a Storm Z penal battalion in a Storm Z. So if you do get caught doing these substances, then you can find yourself not going to being court-martialed or going to prison, but going to fight in a penal unit, which the inference there is you'll be sent to the front lines to kind of certain death or high probability of dying. Storm Z units have suffered huge casualties, so being sent to one amounts to a death sentence, as I was saying. Quote, people there are always on the front line and taking fire. They are 95% kamikazes there, one soldier comments. As one soldier puts it, Storm Z is a battalion for junkies where you go for getting drunk, for beating someone up, for hooliganism, for everything you get sentences for in the civilian world. Here we have guys who brought girls directly to their positions, so 15 people went to Storm immediately afterwards. Although Russian military courts have dealt with hundreds of cases of drug use, commanders often bypass the military justice system and carry out sentences themselves. Quote, let's be honest, no one needs a brouhaha here. Drugs in the battalion are a stain on everyone. Nobody needs a prosecutor's office and the investigative committee here, and there will be no trial. It's easier to put them in a pit for 2 days and write papers saying they are being transferred to the Storm. You can't refuse. So obviously there's different views here. This guy's more of a special military special forces operative or something where he's pretty anti-drugs, but there'll be mobilized troops and there'll be conscripted troops, and there'll be Storm Z troops who have different opinions and different experiences in this regard. But yeah, just that's a useful insight into the Russian army, I guess. Right, moving on. Here is Fabian Hoffman saying, approximately 12 months ago, who is Fabian Hoffman? Just to let you know, doctoral research fellow, Nuclear Oslo, defense policy, missile technology, and nuclear strategy. Okay, so approximately 12 months ago, Russia initiated a large-scale. This is about long-range strikes, this whole thread. Large-scale long-range strike campaign against Ukraine. I have gathered data on the long-range strike, or LRS. So every time I say LRS, that means long-range strike. That's going to be anything with a cruise missile, ballistic missile, or indeed Shahed attack drone, something like that. Weapons. He's gathered data on the long-range strike weapons employed by Russia and Ukraine's success in intercepting them. This thread provides a summary of these findings. According to official information provided by the Ukrainian Air Force, Russia has launched a minimum of 3,967 to 4,000 LRS weapons against Ukraine in the past 12 months. Out of these, 3,249 were successfully intercepted. So that is a rate. Let's go and actually work that out. So that's 3,249 out of about 4,000. That's basically an 82% success rate. That is, I think, really impressive. That is more than I thought it would be. Please note that this estimate may underestimate the total number of long-range strike weapons launched, while it may potentially underestimate the amount launched. There could be more than 4,000. And it potentially overestimates the number of intercepted long-range strike weapons, e.g. the Ukrainians portraying failed launches as successful intercepts. So one come crashing down might be, we intercepted that, rather than it's sort of failing. So there's lots to be said about that. So you take the 82% as a very, salty claim there. In any case, these numbers indicate the staggering amount of ammunition consumed in modern warfare. Contemporary wars are missile wars. States must adapt and prepare accordingly, investing in both their own offensive strike capabilities and defensive countermeasures. The first intense period occurred during winter 2022 to 23, when Russia targeted Ukraine's electrical infrastructure, predominantly using cruise missiles. The highest number of LRS launched in a single day also occurred during this period, with Russia launching 131 LRS on the 17th of November 2022. I talked about that the other day. The intensity of long-range strikes decreased from January to April of this year, but picked up again in May. September 23 is the highest month in terms of LRS launched. However, it is evident that the use of cruise missiles in these attacks has decreased, likely due to stockpile shortages. Exactly what I said the other day, which is that the highest was about 130 last year, but then since then there's been an increase, but the increase is coming predominantly from Shahed drones rather than from cruise missiles. As you can see here, April, March, February, May, March and April, really low. And that's not going to be low. As many times before I said again, it's not going to be low because Russia thought, let's not bother doing missiles this month. Let's not bother doing more missile strikes this month. They had the needs in May, right? The need was there. Look, this is a need, or at least a perceived need, to attack Ukraine with missiles. But that need will have existed here. But they weren't firing those things there. So what was the situation here? Well, the situation here was that they didn't have the missiles and predominantly didn't have the drones. So I'm pretty sure we've got evidence to suggest that they did get some big consignments of Shahed drones in. And then now there are claims that they're able to possibly manufacture them. I don't know if they can already, but it's in a pipeline for manufacturing them indigenously. So we have this change where they have started to use them more frequently since April, both in terms of cruise missiles, but mainly in terms of Shahed drones there, long-range drones. So anyway, the total count of long-range strike weapons launched can be categorized as follows: 2,227 long-range drones, That's the Shahid 136. That's 56.1% of the LRS. 1,673 cruise missiles, that's 42.2%, and 67 ballistics missiles, so that's 1.7%. So you can see the different proportions of aerial threats that were sent. On average, Ukraine has managed to intercept 87.2% of long-range drones. So we talked about 82% earlier, that which is total, but they strike more drones than cruise missiles. So 87.2% of long-range drones are intercepted, 76.5% of launched cruise missiles, and 41.8% of launched ballistic missiles. So ballistic missiles, cruise missiles fly lower and aren't crazy fast. You can kind of move them around, and they can have variable flight paths. A ballistic missile, you shoot it up often into the atmosphere, and it comes down, and that trajectory is very difficult to take out with anti-aircraft warfare systems because they are flying so high, and then the speed of them coming down, so on and so forth. So it's much harder to take them out, and that's why you see only 41.8% of launched ballistic missiles being taken out. And you need decent systems generally to be able to take these missiles out, such as Patriot, etc., etc. Looking at the total number of launched missiles, the majority missile systems used were KH-101, KH-555, KH-555, so 740, and 3 M14 caliber 427 missiles. It's highly probable that the unidentified missile category mainly consists of these two types of missiles as well. So they're the ones they mainly use, and when they aren't able to identify them, either going through the air, but and they hit and explode, and it kind of blows up. You don't really know what it was. Kind of like, we didn't see it, and it blew up. Likelihood is going to be their most common missile, right? Not necessarily, but Ukraine achieved great success in intercepting subsonic cruise missiles, KH-101, 55, 555s, 3 M14 caliber, and KH-59. Moderate success in intercepting ballistic missiles, the Iskanders, and the Kinzhals. Those are the daggers. Those are you've got subsonic, which is under the speed of sound, supersonic above the speed of sound up to Mach 5, and then hypersonic, which is above Mach 5. So it's 5 times the speed of sound, really quick. And that's what Kinzhal is supposed to be. There are arguments about exactly what Kinzhal can do and what its stats really are. And low to no success intercepting supersonic. So these are Mach 1 to Mach 5 cruise missiles, P800 Onyx and KH-22. Those are anti-ship missiles that are particularly difficult to shoot down. There is a strong correlation, 0.973, between the number of launched intercepted LRS, i.e. the number of launched LRS increases. As it increases, so does the number of intercepted LRS. This indicates that Ukraine's missile defense system is capable of defending against large-scale attacks. In other words, as they send more, almost the same proportion, almost 0.973, 97%, I'd read that as, of those are shot down. As in 97% of those of the missiles are 97% likely to follow the same statistical pattern. This is really trying to work out how to explain this. I mean, you get the point. He's explained it there. So the more missiles that Russia shoot, they're still going to shoot broadly that proportion of them down, which means that actually the air defense system, the air defense network is fairly capable, and it can deal with large-scale saturation attacks. Mainly with the same statistics as a smaller attack is what I think the conclusion is there. Okay, on average, for every additional range strike weapon launched, there is an increase of 0.776 in the number of intercepted long-range strike weapons. Also note the high R squared, which suggests that launched LRS is a strong predictor of intercepted LRS in the model. That number, that's a little bit different to, I'm not quite sure what the difference is between, on average, every additional long-range strike weapon launch. Okay, we'll just carry on. The implications of this cannot be overstated. It directly challenges a significant portion of the pre-war discourse on missile defense, which argued that missile defense is ineffective, especially when dealing with large-scale and complex missile rates. However, these statistics also highlight a gap in Ukraine's IAMD capability, so that's their kind of network capability. At present, Ukraine cannot effectively defend against supersonic cruise missiles. For those particularly fast cruise missiles, Ukraine requires additional Patriot launchers, radars, and interceptors to adequately protect against these types of threats, which is good news because they're buying another 5. And he's going to continue taking a look at these figures as the months go by. But I thought that was a useful thread to just give you a little bit of an understanding of what's going on. Thank you for listening. I cut the end of this one off because, me, I banged on for way too long. So anyway, that's that. I look forward to speaking to you in the next video. I really am very grateful for all the members. So thank you so much to you guys. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.